好，各位大家午安，欢迎大家来参加徐斌教授的演讲哈。我是台大社会系的林国明啊，非常荣幸能够来主持今天的这场演讲哈。那在座很多人的对徐斌教授都非常的熟悉哈，我就简单的开个场介绍一下哈。他是美国 Emory 大学的社会系的教授哈。那他目前也是即将了哈，就是美国社会学会的官方刊物之一的 Sociological Theory 的主编哈。那他的领域包括社会学理论、文化社会学、政治社会学哈，Civil Society 灾难政治跟集体记忆哈。他出版了3本书了哈。那包括从 Civil Society 观点去看民主哈。包括谈世代跟记忆政治哈，还包括赈灾的这个过程中的公民的参与哈。那他今天要跟我们讲的这个题目哈，英文在这里哈，中文是当百万丧钟敲响之时哈，全球如何纪念新冠逝者。那我就不多说哦，那我们就欢迎徐斌教授。
非常感谢林教授，也非常感谢大家来参加我的演讲，非常荣幸也高兴到这个台大这样一个iconic university， 能够来和大家交流。那么今天我做的演讲的题目是关于我现在进行的2个 projects 当中的一个，是关于全球的COVID 的记忆，那么另外一个是关于这个中国的COVID 的应对的这样一本书，所以2个书有 overlapping， 所以有时候大家觉得你到底在做什么？但其实是2个不同的 projects。我还是用英文讲吧，因为整个是用英文做的一个研究。So let me start from here, from this picture. In her video essay, "Your Eyes Will Be an Empty Word" in 2021. Coco Fusco, an artist and activist from Cuba originally, but active in the United States. And she rowed a boat around an island, as you can see here. And drone cameras provided a panorama view of Fusco, leisurely and also meditatively rowing on the sea. But this ideological image, however, was in stark contrast with the play's and this play's dark history. This island is called Hart Island. I don't think anyone in this room will know this island. It's off the coast of Bronx, New York. Not even Americans know this island. It is called a potter's field, which basically means that it is a burial ground for those unclaimed dead. So if a homeless person died on the street with no identification, and this person's body was sent to this place and buried. We don't know how many of them, millions, from the Civil War period to now, including COVID, many of them actually buried in this island. So this is Potter's Field. So let me show a video clip of this essay very quickly. And I took the video in Berlin in one of her exhibitions, and then later saw this again in Chicago. Where is concentration of the term? They were coming. They were gone. They were vanished. They were out. They were missing. They were uplifted. They were unmoved. Or they were simply unmoved. They were hurriedly left based on registration, patient. They are interred by men who they hang on a small island with a number of bodies. Burying them on this island is the finale of a social exclusion process, reducing individuals into numbers and turning a person into a body in the plain, unnamed coffin, and which sometimes had to share with a mass grave with quite a lot of other bodies. You never know who they are, but you shared this grave with others. And the graves were reused when bodies were decomposed. So it was a double tragedy for a person. The first tragedy is the person died, but this person died twice as a corporeal person, as a body, and also as a social person whose traces were erased except for a case number. Of course, I don't think anyone in this room will end up there, but we are actually closer to this kind of burial than we thought. For example, this picture, some of you, if you pay attention to the COVID crisis in Europe, you know where it is. It's in Bergamo, Italy, one of the epicenter towns in Europe. And what happened at the time is crematories in the small city all overwhelmed by so many bodies. So the Italian military mobilized trucks to ship the body to other places to get the body burned. So in this kind of situation, we can see that you are basically reduced into a number, into one of the bodies. And this happened everywhere in New York City, in other big cities as well. All crematories ran day and night to burn bodies into ashes, but were all overwhelmed. And many bodies had to stay in hospitals for a time. And your final fate is you probably become one of the numbers. Speaking of the numbers, this is actually the biggest number. How many of them? 7,115,974 people. This number I got from WHO's website last night. So this is the number of the people who died from COVID. Of course, public health expert will tell you that this number is certainly an undercount, right? Of course, we know that. So every and each one of the 7 million may be mourned by their families and friends privately. Nevertheless, they die as a result of an unprecedented disaster that swept the globe instead of die separately as particular illnesses. In public commemorations, many of them became unclaimed, not recognized, not remembered by the public except for being a number, like a person buried in the soil of Hart Island. But we all have the urge to avoid this situation. And we want to rescue and recover the dead's names, experiences, and dignity from numbers, especially when the individual's death is a result of a historical event like a COVID. Public commemoration is a fundamental way for individuals' deaths to connect to the historical processes. And publicly remembering someone is not to demand everyone to remember everyone, which is impossible in all these cases, but to save a very tiny space for each one of them so their loved ones can actually find them after they died. And this is why we say no man is an island entire of itself, which is from a quite famous poem by John Donne. And later I will tell you why this particular project is entitled When Millions of Bell Tolls. So before I proceed, I want to clarify on the key concepts. First, my use of memorial goes beyond to the traditional, the term of the memorial, that is a physical space, which is permanent. You can see the sculpture, see the design, and such as the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and the Memorial for the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, or the Zhongzheng Jiniantang here, or Jingmei, and so on and so forth. These are the memorials in your mind. But I also include other forms of memorials, which include public art installations and artistic works, commemorative rituals, and virtual memorials online, and so on and so forth. But more importantly, I use the term memorialization or memorializing in verb forms to emphasize that the study will not be limited to just the memorials, the final products, but also the social processes that lead to and revolve around the memorials. So for example, who actually advocated for this memorial? Who designed the memorial, and who propagate this memorial and how people receive the memorial and so on and so forth. All these social processes around a memorial. So it's not about an object, but about social processes. The key question I ask in this project is how did societies come to terms with the mass excess and unequal deaths of the COVID pandemic? I'll explain later, but just to let you know, this is the New York Times front page when US casualties reached 100,000. Of course, it does not list every name of the 100,000. It's just a small sample, which is about 1,000 people. And still, this is massive representation of the death. So what is the mass death? The first problem comes from the huge number of deaths caused by the COVID. A common public sentiment today is that people want to mourn and memorialize their loved ones as individuals with unique experiences and characters and values and also their lives. But if you're one of the 7 millions, and how do you do that publicly? In other words, how do memorials remember 7 million and also each individual? And this one is also a logistical question. That is, how to present all the names, 7 millions, or in a country at least, 100,000 names. Even, New York Times, the front page only includes less than 1,000 names. So it's a logistical question. It's also a symbolic question as well. And we all know mass death is a problem of excess deaths. Public health experts have different definitions about excess deaths, but basically is that, people died, shouldn't have died in this COVID memorial. And then we can find people to blame for the deaths, and do we want to represent those people in the memorial processes or memorializations? Governments are certainly not the only ones to blame, and you have other people who are just good citizens in normal days. For example, your neighbors who believe that the virus was a hoax, and your friends who refused to wear masks, and your coworkers who went to bars and restaurants at the height of the pandemic years, and Facebook buddies, and spread conspiracy theories, and so on and so forth. They contributed to the deaths of others and probably themselves. And how to represent this very difficult question, that is, who actually was responsible for the excess deaths. Finally, excess deaths usually is unequal deaths. And we all know there's a concept in sociology that is called vulnerability. Some people are more likely to die than others. The elderlies, the people with existing conditions, and people with lower socioeconomic statuses, and so on and so forth. They're more likely to die. Social inequality in health is a persistent topic in sociology and other fields as well. The problem now is, how do memorialization processes represent this social inequality, or just keep quiet, not actually talking about the issue, even when they're discussing what could be the best form to remember them? So that was the 3 questions. So if we link these issues to classical social theory, and we find this person who is Emile Durkheim, you all know that. Collective memory study starts with Emile Durkheim in sociology, and his student, Maurice Hopwox, right? One of the key questions is the relationship between individual and society, which is also a very fundamental question in the whole social theory. Individuals are in a never-ending love-hate relationship with their societies, longing to join others when being too sequestered, but staying far away from the madding crowd when being too close. And connections and the tensions between individuals and the society persist even after individuals die. And this is where the collective memory study starts from. So the scholarship of collective memory has been wrestling with this topic, and when it was pioneered by Emile Durkheim and Maurice Hopwox. But so Durkheim's argument is pretty well known. That is, when you mourn people and your expression of feeling is not an outburst of your feeling alone, but also is a moral obligation imposed by the society on you. So you're morally obligated to mourn the member of your community, to reconfirm the solidarity of the community. this is apparently a very functionalist argument. So as you can expect, it was actually criticized by many people would say that, mourning could lead to conflicts. Mourning is full of conflicts and so on and so forth. So this is a very enduring debate in the field. But there's one thing that is missing in this debate, that is how societies remember individuals, rather than just conflict versus solidarity, this kind of debate. And this is not entirely addressed by the theorists. Certainly you have Maurice Hobwatz, who said that individuals remember the past in social framework, such as your class, your family, and so on and so forth. But it is very different from the question I actually focus on here, because his question is how individuals remember in society, but my question is how societies remember individuals. Infamously, Durkheim doesn't really care about individuals. And individuals have no status in his theory. Basically, it's the society. Society is the God, and then impose everything on individual. That's what we know that. So this is understandable, and that Durkheim doesn't really talk about societies remember individuals. But in this particular literature on war memories, individuals have its turning point, which basically in historiography is after World War I. So World War I is a turning point because before World War I, war memories is all about generals, commanders, and heroes. But after World War I, you have George Morley's very famous study about the so-called fallen soldier. Ordinary soldiers became the icons of memory and became something that the states can use for their political purposes. And then you can see lots of things focus on those unnamed soldiers. Cenotaph in London and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. In the Vietnam Veterans Memorial's case, and the moral obligation is an ambiguous topic. And then you all have it on the memorial is just names, and that's it. And without talking about war itself, separating individuals from wars, right? So that was the scholarship that told me. Or another side of the war memories is the victims. So you have individual victims' names sometimes collected by the community and represented in those memorials. So this is a Prague's Pinkasova Synagogue. If you have been to Prague, this is one of the places you go there. So it's the names and the years of birth and years of death. So individuals. But all these are war memories. And war memories are the favorite memory genres of the states because they have symbolic benefits. But disasters are not wars. COVID-19 is not a war, it's a disaster. And states see fewer symbolic benefits, but many potential problems and troubles. For example, in this COVID, every states were criticized by many people at some points. Even the states probably do the response fairly well. And lack of state support meant that memorialization by societal groups may have fewer resources, take marginal spaces, and attract less public attention. All these factors make memorialization of deaths in major disaster different and more difficult logistically and also symbolically as well. So the COVID memorialization projects provide an unfortunately unique opportunity and for us to contribute to the literature on collective memory, which is a huge field now, beyond sociology and more historical than sociology in many other fields as well. That is a central topic, how to memorialize individuals, especially in big catastrophes other than wars and the political atrocities. So I started this project a few years ago, as you imagine. That is the pretty much end of the COVID, and I'm a collective memory scholar. So naturally, I think about how to use my scholarship as a way to memorialize the individuals and also to observe this very important global phenomenon. So since this is a global phenomenon, so I hire a multinational team of research assistants from different countries speaking different languages to collect online of the memorials. So we end up 290 cases from 11 countries. The 11 countries included 10 countries in terms of their official stats of casualty, plus China, because China's stats are not reliable. According to estimates, the actual casualty is from 1 million to 3 million, which will put China in number 2 or number 3 after the United States. So that was the 11 countries. Also, I'm China scholar. I'm very familiar with the country. And from the 290 cases, I selected 47 of them by their public influence and media coverage, and also sophistication in design and to do in-depth analysis. And also for all the 290 cases, I'm conducting content analysis with a research assistant who is now at the University of Pennsylvania doing content analysis of some of the key components of the cases. So moving forward, I will conduct a survey based on the extracted information from 290 cases, because sometimes media reports and online materials are not complete. So I ask a question about what's your role in the processes, and what's your understanding of the meaning of memorialization, and so on and so forth. So we have about like 5,000 people or organizations, a huge list, and to conduct this online survey. And also in the end of the survey, there will be a question that, are you willing to receive interviews about your involvement in the memorial process? So these 2 steps will be done in this year. In addition, I have already conducted field work in Bergamo, Italy. I mentioned this as the epicenter town of Italy's COVID crisis. So particularly, I work on so these are the pictures of a Bergamo field work. As you can imagine, Italy is probably the best place to do field work, right, in summer. And also driving in Italy is not fun. Well, I should say it's very fun. It's too fun sometimes. As you can see here, this is my GPS. This is exactly, it's like driving in Alishan is pretty much the same experience. But some of but hiring a car, not hiring, renting a car and driving to those places is necessary, because some of the memorials are in really, really remote areas. At the top of the mountain here, this one is called Doors to Heaven. And if you don't reach that area and you don't actually arrive at the site, you don't understand why it is called Door of Heaven. It's at the top of the mountains, and what you can see is the sky, is the heaven. And so I took the picture, and I have a Nikon D850 with me with this 35 millimeter lens to do this kind of work. So it's kind of interesting way to see the field work and also interview the people who are involved in the processes. So moving forward, I'll go to Brazil this year in October. I'll explain why Brazil is important, and also London, UK for the National COVID Memorial in London, and the United States, of course, in Kentucky, and also in Chicago next year. I will explain why the sites are important. How to analyze this mountain of data? The focus of this analysis is meanings. How do you understand the meanings of the memorials from different perspectives? If you're a creator, what is your intended meaning? If you're a designer, what is your intended meaning? Or if a person participates in the ritual, what is your understanding of the meaning, your reception of the meaning? What do you think of this memorial reception of meaning? So to do so, I rely on this model of cultural analysis. Paige, I should know this, right? This is Wendy Gris was a very classical framework of cultural analysis. It's called cultural diamond. So you have the cultural object, in this case it's a memorial, and then also you have creators, including sponsors, designers, and the funders, and so on and so forth. And now reception, including media critics and participants, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of a cultural analysis, not just about the object, but also about social processes of this, of memorialization. So let me just report some preliminary findings. Since this is just a work in progress, although it sounds like an excuse for sloppy work, but it is actually a work in progress. So I found that when we talk about 3 kinds of deaths, the first one is the mass deaths. And many of the projects provide very interesting examples to deal with the dilemma between many and one, individual and the collective. So for example, this one. This is a picture of in America, remember? Arguably the most visible COVID memorial in the US. It's a temporary one, it's our installation. And it is artistically simple because it consists of more than 700,000 white small flags, and which cover an area in National Mall in Washington, DC. And in 2021, at the time, the death toll in the United States is 700,000. And each flag represented one person who died of COVID. And the flags together covered a large area of the National Mall. And so, by the way, this is a composite image, which basically means that the photographer took thousands of pictures and composed them into one image. That's one. So it's very high resolution one. And this large area actually attracted attention from the media, from visitors, and from passers-by. The artist Suzanne Fistenberg self-consciously attempted to solve the problem of many versus one individual versus collectivity by visualizing an abstract number in objects. The purpose of using this large number of flags is, according to her, is to show the magnitude of our loss as a nation while honoring each person who has died from COVID. But this is not the whole story. So if we have a close-up, we'll find that on many of the flags, you have messages. The messages were left by the family members to the person who already died. It could be from the visitors just pass this place and then write the message on the white flags, but also you have website set up by the artist. So you send a message and to the volunteers for the project and to say, this is my father or grandfather died of this COVID, and this is our message. And the volunteers will put your message on the white flag. So in this way, the traditional visitors are not visitors anymore. They are activated to transform themselves into participants of this memorial object, right? And then in a nutshell, this project combines small objects with mass participation to strike a balance between remembering individuals and the remembering collectivity, between honoring one and then remembering many. Some other memorial projects are not so huge, covering a large area. So this is one of my favorite research projects called A Crack in the Hourglass. To explain this, I have to play a video clip from their website.
My studio, we decided to make an artwork that would allow people to come together and see a live event. We thought that it was important that it be something live that somebody from any time zone could log into and experience together with their loved ones. The Crack in the Hourglass is basically a robot arm controlled by a custom-made software. You send a photograph of a loved one or a family, a friend, over a website called acrackinthehourglass.net. It gets analyzed and it very slowly is drawn by dropping sand from an hourglass. As this image is appearing, there's two cameras that are broadcasting the action live. So when you participate, you can invite friends to log on to the website and see it. The work is the result of a collaboration between people at my studio. The work comes out of discussion, comes out of a desire from all of us to do something that would allow us to, I guess, not feel so lonely. When you enter the hall at the Brooklyn Museum, you see all of these faces, you notice that there is an exchange of glances around the room. Most of the people in the portraits are looking back. Most people choose photographs where the subject is not distant or looking away, but they're looking straight at the camera. there's a moment which the image tilts slowly and gravity pulls the sand down, making the portrait disappear and recovering all the sand to be recycled into new portraits. All the portraits so far, hundreds of them, are all made with the same small amount of sand. And for me, that was really important because it was a sense of universal solidarity around this and a sense of connection.
There are a few powerful features of this artistic work. The first one is the participation. It's not just important, but also is indispensable. Without participation, this object doesn't actually exist. You rely on the images sent to the artist and to make the sand an artistic object. And also another feature is the disappearance of the image, the sand image, recycle the sand to a new image, which tells people about ephemeral feature of life, but also tells people about the solidarity around the people. And in an interview, the artist says something that is very close to a classical concept in the literature of collective memory that is called counter-monument by James Young. But his concept is called anti-monument. In other words, it's not the monument that you see there. It's lofty, it's high, all these permanent site and also structure. Rather, it's just a grain of sand, and which will disappear. So he emphasizes that the ephemeral feature of anti-monuments in general basically is something that more fragile, something more relational, and something that depends on participation to exist. So in this way, this is one of the solutions that people figure out to deal with one and many, that is participation, decentralized. So this is another example of memorial, which was made by an artist famous for his artwork in so-called Burning Man rituals. I don't know if anyone knows that. In the desert of California and Nevada. Let's see if this works. Sorry about this. Okay, it works. Good. So as you can see, so this structure is in the shape of southeastern Buddhist temple, right? And then if you take a close look at it, and then you can walk under the structure, and then you find the structure consists of thousands or maybe more pieces, wood pieces, and each of the pieces is fairly elaborate and with all kinds of patterns as well. One thing that is interesting is when we talk about participation is that you can write messages on those pieces. In fact, people do. People travel from other places of UK and to do that. So it was quite popular and highly rated and also reported in England at the time. But what is more dramatic is the finale of the project is to burn it. Well, there are some arguments at the local level, particularly by the residents of that town, say this is just a waste of our taxpayers' money, right? Because it was funded by the local government, which is fair argument. But on the other hand, many others appreciate this kind of project to commemorate COVID. So the ritual, the burning ritual, in the end was quite moving, and people were convinced that it actually tells us about the essence of life, because you spend so much time and so much money and to design this with all these elaborate patterns. It's like a life. You make so much effort to live. But in the end, the end is death. And then you burn that structure, burn your life into ash, which is quite interesting story to think about how to commemorate the individuals and individual participation also at the heart. So very quickly about this kind of a memorial, I call it a crowdsourced memorial, which is very different from the traditional one. So what happened was at the time, someone came up with an idea. For example, this one, the Flora Hearts, and then tell people online to look, let's have a collective projects at different places and at different times, and just put the Flora Hearts in public spaces to commemorate the COVID victims. So it's very much like crowdsourced projects for in other fields as well. Of course, you find traditional physical memorials try to solve the problem, but I would say their solution is very much unsuccessful. And there are fewer, 109 cases of physical memorials. This one is at Kentucky, a city called Frankfort, not Frankfurt. Frankfurt was the capital city of that state. And to be honest, this design is boring. And if you find the message is a united we stand, which is kind of cliche for memorial at a ball, but it was supported by the governor Andy Beshear, who is a blue governor in a red state. Red state means that Kentucky is very much conservative or Republican. But Andy Beshear was the one behind this project and set up a fund, call for donation, and then unveil the monument and make a speech. But in the unveiling and then finalizing memorial, finalizing ceremony, and none of the Republican politicians attended this ritual. You see the political divide. But for us, more important is actually the individuality disappeared from this. It's very much like for the Renmin, for the people, is a very collective term that we stand together and this kind of collectivity. We don't see individuals. And similarly, this is a memorial within the Brazilian Senate building, 27 structures with illuminating lights, and which stands for 27 states in Brazil. And it was a result of a very complex political struggles at a congressional level. And then later, that Bolsonaro was in prison. But for our interest, we see the same thing, that this kind of official memorial, individuality disappeared in this memorial as well. So the second part of the project deals with how to memorialize the excess deaths. But on this the topic, we have little to say because not many memorials say something about excess deaths. And the scenario could be like in two forms. One is that the memorial itself does not say anything about excess deaths. It's apolitical. It's not critical, but the processes themselves could be very political. So in this sense, we find this very famous one, that is the National COVID Memorial Wall in London, which probably is the most well-known one in Europe. If you've been to London, you know where Westminster is. So this one is opposite Westminster by River Thames. It used to be a very long wall of graffiti. And so two organizations started this processes, and then they decided to cover this wall by hearts. Each heart represents one person who died from COVID. And they draw these hearts and invited people to write messages in the heart about their deceased ones. Certainly some people didn't get a message. I saw some just random messages about love, Sally versus Sally and Harry stay together forever, that kind of thing. But most people actually pay attention to the plate and then to say this is a COVID memorial, and then put their pictures of their loved ones or some small objects in the loved ones in there. So I walked from the beginning to the end of the war. In the end, there's a special section for child victims of the COVID, which was relatively small one because not many children actually died in the COVID. So you don't see a lot of political messages in the memorial, but this process is very political. Two organizations started this process, include one is bereaved families of the COVID victims, which is understandable. And the other one is called led by donkeys. If you know English phrases well, you know that led by donkeys basically means the lions led by donkeys. That English soldiers are all good, are lions, but the donkeys are the generals. So in other words, to blame the generals for the failure of the wars, right? So led by donkeys was an organized, it should be a group that is very anti-Brexit. And at the time, we all know the Prime Minister of England was Boris Johnson, one of the major figures of the Brexit movement. So led by donkeys have their political agenda, and then they successfully mobilize a huge network of politicians, public figures, and media journalists behind this war. And then they even invited Boris Johnson to visit, and Boris Johnson didn't say anything. But one night people saw Johnson was at the wall and walked for like 2 minutes and then gone. So that was one of the interesting ways to think about the apolitical message and the political processes. So this is why I emphasize the project is really about process rather than the object alone. Another project was more explicitly political. This is in Bergamo, Italy, the epicenter town. It's called Bosco della Memoria, which means the forest of memory. It's right behind Papa Giovanni Hospital, which was also the epicenter hospital in Italy. So I went there 3 times. I have to confess that this is one of the failures of my field research. First time I went there, took pictures with the stelas. I see this garden, this forest, and then left. I feel like this is just another memorial. But there's something lingering in my mind and something that's bothering me, but still couldn't figure out what that was. So I decided to go there again. Of course, the next year I was invited by University of Trento to teach a graduate seminar there. So I just took train from Trento to Bergamo. And I found out that the thing that bothered me was the text. So nowadays, if you look at the memorials, they're all very minimalist. Not many messages, not many texts, not many words. But on this is very, very unusual. On each plate, you find lots of texts, lots of words about, when the COVID started. And even there's on one of the plates, there's a very dramatic sentence to blame the governments for the failure to respond to the COVID. This is very unusual. At the time, it was a puzzle. Why? I know this project was funded and sponsored by the government. And it criticized the government. So I was like, what's going on? So my reaction first is that to interview people. Of course, the first result would be the architect who was responsible for the design. So I drove from Bergamo to Parma to interview the architects in their firm. And they told me, no, we didn't do that. We hate it. We were angry about this design. This was added to our original design. Our original design was just the garden. It's the forest of memory. It's a living garden with the trees growing. The intended meaning is that life will be renewed. Even people will die, and the life will be renewed and grow, and people and children play in this garden. It's a great idea. But when this garden was finalized, they were shocked by this addition. So I asked them, do you know who actually added all these things? And because 6 places, they're huge thing. So he said, probably someone in the Bergamo city government. So I traveled back to Bergamo and to interview the mayor. And the mayor kindly received me and said, no, I was not responsible for that. At the time, the mayor was another person. It's called Gori. Gori now, still now, was the member of the European Parliament. So I found his spokesperson. The spokesperson said, yes, we did that. But the puzzle is that why in a government-sponsored project, and then you criticize the government. And then he told me, well, government is a big concept. There's a central government, you have a regional government, and also you have city government. So just to give you a background, so this is located in a region called Lombardia. And the Lombardia was very much like a conservative, controlled by some conservative parties. But At the time, the city government, still now, is on the left side, is very progressive. And this mayor, Gori, who later became a progressive member of the European Parliament. And also at the time, the Italian national government, the prime minister was Draghi, who was also a progressive politician. So basically the government they refer to in the text is actually the Lombardia region. So I reread the text and finally figure out this is really about blaming the regional government. And the text mentioned other places in Lombardia as well. So that puzzle is solved. And also check the textual material and the particular media reports. Draghi, the prime minister, visited this place when it is unveiled. Well, when it started actually in 2021. So you can see that the political message was so explicit in this memorial to talk about excess deaths. So the final one is something that is still ongoing, which is in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and which was an interesting sort of a garden as well. So the design, I'm still trying to figure out what the design actually wants to say. But what is more important is the people behind this project was the health minister of Brazil at the time to make some of the students in this room happy. And this person is a sociologist. So we still can do something, right? If we study sociology. So as you can see here from her statement, she actually made a lot of statements about this memorial. Basically, is to say that we need to reflect on the mistakes and errors we made in responding to this, disaster. And this memorial and the related processes was the part of the process of anti-Bolsonaro that happened at the same time. We all know Bolsonaro later was in prison and then he was defeated by Lula in the presidential election. So now this project is more complicated than used to be because there will be an election in October 2026. And actually 2 elections. One election is the first one, and then if no one votes above 50%, and you have a runoff in the end of October. 2 leading candidates, one is incumbent President Lula, the person who is really old, like 81, but he showed his muscle in his gym, pictures and videos. But the other one probably looks familiar, right? Looks like a Bolsonaro. Yes, he has a last name Bolsonaro. He's the son of a Sharia Bolsonaro. His name is Flavio Bolsonaro. So his ideas and political agenda are very much in line in his father's, which is not surprising in the cases of dictators' sons, or maybe in Taiwan context is the grandsons. So this is one interesting things that we're going to observe. But the last one is I have to say that sorry, we don't have a lot of things to say. So in other words, in all the memorial projects, people do not talk about unequal deaths. Social inequality just evade our attention, and we do not talk about inequality almost at all. A few memorials talk about social inequality, but pay more attention to so-called frontline workers or key workers or essential workers in different contexts. This one is a metro employees in New York. And this is a poem written for them. But other than these projects, we don't have a lot of statements and discussions of social inequality in those processes. And so that's basically what we have so far. So just to conclude some of the preliminary findings, so I want to say a few things about memorial as a way to deal with some of the key issues, and particularly about how to remember individuals in such a catastrophe. And to come to terms with the mass excess and unequal deaths, the COVID memorialization projects around the world demonstrate a general feature that is decentralization and also participation. You have lots of interactive features in almost all the memorials, and people from all over the world join in the collective effort and remembering mass participation, mass and deaths. And the visitors become co-creators, and the term memorial also takes on new meanings and individuals' dignity and worth are effectively highlighted. In other words, millions of bells toll for millions of individuals. Nevertheless, the COVID memorialization fails in two aspects. One is excess deaths. We don't have a lot of discussions about excess deaths. I'm not saying you have to find explicit statement in the memorial or in the final products, but I would say that memorialization is a unique opportunity for us to have more constructive, more productive public discussions about the COVID or public health crisis, but we don't have that. And also about the social inequality, or more particularly, health inequality, which is almost completely absent from all the memorialization. So just to conclude today's presentation, when the whole world seems to turn the page and move on and forget the pandemic, it might be the time for us to re-centralize memorialization as an opportunity to have more public discussions about COVID and about our health system, about the society, about our divides along many, many fault lines, right? And also we can reflect on the mistakes we have collectively made and discover more disadvantaged groups suffering, which is ignored in this catastrophe. In other words, we need to toll the bells again. And the bells are not only for mourning, but also for warning, warning, and not only for the deceased, but also for the living. So in this sense, I would want to record the poem by John Donne, that is therefore send not to know for whom the bells tolls, it tolls for thee. This thee is for all of us. Thank you very much.
徐老师非常精彩的演讲哈，带我们经历这么多的地方跟这个故事，透过这个主题啊，去探究一些深刻的社会学的这个议题哈。我个人有些印象深刻的是怎么去做这个文化政治、记忆政治的一些方法哈，因为他那个8月初嘛，对，在中研院有个如何从质性研究里面去产生这个理论，听说报名的已经超过300人了哦，这个不晓得现在还可不可以报了哈，不过相信一定有非常的这些精彩哈。那个再次感谢这个徐老师，那我们现在就开放大家的提问跟这个讨论，哈，中文、英文应该都可以哈，好，那个来，那有没有谁要来那个徐志远？
谢谢，大家好，维伦